We have a quorum here, and well, I'm going out on a limb there. I didn't actually count, but I saw Elizabeth pop on, and I thought, yeah, she's definitely gonna put us up there, I think. So we could call our meeting to order, and Kelly, would you do us the honors of taking attendance? Just making sure everybody is
okay. We have India Beale.
Here. Mm-hmm.
Cliff Dossel.
here.
David Finn.
Here.
Dara Silver said she was going to be out today. Betsy Towns. I don't see Betsy. Elizabeth Rapetti.
Here.
Owens Daniels. Don't see Owens. Jane had a family issue and is probably not going to make it today. Okay. Jennifer Finkel.
Here.
And Jason Thiel.
Here.
Okay. Hanging in there. Well, we're missing a few, but we will carry on here. Thank you all for coming. The first order is going to be, of course, to approve the summary of minutes from the last meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes? Could be a voice. Hi, Owens.
Owens Daniels.
Owens just popped in.
I approve the minutes.
India moved to approve. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Jason. Jason seconds. All in favor? We could just do a hands vote. Visual on the screen.
You voting, Owens, on approving the minutes?
He's got something. Okay.
I got a little problem with my computer, and I'm just trying to figure something out here.
We can see and hear you, so.
Yeah, I can see and hear you guys, but I got a little problem with my camera. It kind of comes in and out. We'll see.
Okay.
Well, Kelly, I'm going to turn this over to your organizational abilities.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming today and putting up with all the last minute changes to have a virtual meeting. So last month we came to you with Jeff Famsler from Winston-Salem DOT and Kimberly Barr and Tim Guadagno from Stimmel Associates, and we showed you some possible sites for the Salem Parkway bridge art. So we got a lot of good feedback on those locations, and we looked at them a little more closely. Drove up and down the Parkway, looked at where the bridges were blocking possible sites, where exit signs were blocking sites, curves, and use that in your comments to kind of help narrow down these sculpture locations. We considered where the lights were going in, as we discussed a little bit last time, and then the sound barriers, both the clear ones on the Peters Creek Parkway Bridge and also the concrete barriers on the sides of the Parkway. So we've updated those recommendations. I'm just gonna note that Betsy Towns is here now. So we've updated those recommendations, and what we're looking for just is an endorsement by this group so that we can move forward with taking this to the Mayor's Design Review Committee, which is an organization made up mainly of Creative Corridors members that pre-existed the Public Art Commission for the purpose of, approving designs on the Business 40 Salem Parkway project. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Jeff Fansler. And Jeff, are you going to share the Business 40 PDF, or do you want me to?
Kelly, I'll share it. Can everyone hear me okay?
Hey,
Very good. Let me pull this up and share the screen here 1 second. All right, I should be sharing that screen now. Hopefully you all can see that. By a gentle nod, I will confirm that.
That's five pieces.
I will ask that if you are not on mute, if you will do so while I run through this, and then we'll open it up for discussion once I finish up. Okay, so good afternoon, members of the committee, Mr. Chairman, and folks in attendance. I appreciate your time to kind of come back at this once again. As Kelly mentioned, this is, the past month, we've really narrowed down some of what we discussed last time and to nail down some of these locations that we're asking you to endorse and as we move forward. As I stated last time, I'll preface this real briefly once again, just to remind us all of the intent of this project is to follow through on some commitments that were made prior. As the Business 40 project was in development, you heard Kelly mention that the Creative Corridors Coalition is heavily involved with some of these recommendations. And what we're doing is basically in line with the guidelines that were published, adopted through City Council a number of years ago through that body. And so what we're asking today is we'll go over these revised locations in more detail, have some general discussion, and then we'd ask that we make a motion to endorse these so that we can continue on our journey and have this project really take legs and get moving. So with that, without further ado, what I'll do is I'll start with the screen that I'm sharing here and go over what we've landed on to date. And I would ask that if you would just jot down your questions, and I'd be happy to answer all those questions at the end. If you allow me the opportunity to get through these, I'd appreciate that very much. So what we did do is consolidate this effort into basically three major areas of where we are proposing the bridge artwork. Those three areas are, starting from the east and moving west, are Church Street, the Church Street Bridge indicated here. And then we're grouping this Cherry Marshall interchange as one kind of just the central area of the corridor. We're showing two different locations there. And notice on this map, you'll see that the recommended locations are shown by the complete pink circle there, and then the hollow pink empty fill are the potential or possible sculpture location as well. And I'll go over that when we get to the individual sites. And then, of course, lastly, the focal bridge of the corridor is Peter Street Parkway, and where we are proposing artwork there as well. So again, three major focus areas: Church Street, the Cherry Marshall interchange, and the Peter Street Parkway interchange are where we are proposing the bridge artwork. Now, I will notice that we had tried to think about east and west progression. Last time, we spent a lot of time talking about where we were at. We're kind of bookending this project. There was some discussion about the bookends of the corridor. And I think that we still have that identified on this plan, with coming from the east, they're identified at Church Street, and then of course coming from the west, there at Peter Street Parkway. And of course, we heard your concerns about some of the site distance report, some of the obstacles that would limit visibility in the corridor. As Kelly mentioned, we spent a lot of time. Consultants have done a good job vetting that in more detail. And what we've done is revise these locations where we think would be much more feasible and visual and have a better impact for the corridor. So what we'll do now is we'll just go through these three general locations. We'll get into a few more details, and then we'll answer any questions that you may have. So first, Church Street, coming from the east, as you're headed westbound, you'll come to Church Street Bridge first. This is the same location we did advertise last time. Notice that this bridge is currently designed for art structures on the bridge. There is a monument foundation that's built into the parapet wall on that bridge, and it was designed for enhancements of that nature. One thing, again, that you'll see that we talked about last time in detail is that the city is planning for street lighting on these bridges, on all of the bridges. That is something that is built into the bridge walls already. And the city has great pressure to put those in. We're getting that asked almost daily to provide the street lighting. And that is a part of this project that we're going on now, is to include the street lighting. So I think our consultants have done a good job. I'll zoom in here, rendering what the street lighting could look like. And this is a close replica of what we are anticipating based on what's approved with our downtown master plan. But again, notice what we're talking about today would be right in the center of Church Street Bridge, where we have a monument foundation that would support some type of art structure. And so that is the first, coming from the east as you're heading westbound, the first kind of general location of where we are proposing the art sculptures of that nature. And again, just a couple photos of the bridges of what we're talking about with those pedestals that are there to support that structure. And moving on, we'll go to the second location again. Here's where we have made some modifications, and I think we've enhanced where we were last time, and we'll spend a little time here. But as you continue westbound, we'll come to the Cherry Street off-ramp first, and that area that's bounded right here, on this northeast corner. I wanted to point out here what's highlighted in pink is kind of what's replicated here, shown on the overall map of that general location. Notice the visibility. This picture was taken, and what the consultants have done is they've inlaid, as you noticed in both of these renderings, what the landscaping elements would be as well as part of the Business 40 landscaping project as a separate project, but there are significant landscaping efforts that are planned. Both with NCDOT and the city will supplement that as a part of this particular project with additional landscaping elements. That is what STEML is tasked to do. So it's not only a bridge art project. As I mentioned, we have the street lighting. There's a significant landscaping portion to it, and a couple other elements that will really enhance the corridor. But just for perspective, and I think that this helps kind of paint the overall picture, is they have inlaid what those treatments would be as the current NCDOT plans are showing, and kind of just showing the general area of what we are considering a sculpture would be really impactful and visually appealing from your westbound ride on the Parkway. Again, so this is the northeast corner and where we're proposing as you're headed westbound. So let's flip-flop, and as you approach from the west, headed eastbound, back to, coming this direction, if you're following my cursor on the screen, headed back towards Liberty and Main, Church Street this way, you're headed eastbound, you'll notice basically the High Street exit ramp. You all have probably had a chance to ride through that exit ramp now. That's where that median divide kind of comes up, and it points into High Street there. So that is this area right here. But this is that exit ramp, and you'll notice that in the southwest corner, again, they have shown kind of what that would look like as you travel eastbound, coming out of, from Baptist Hospital, where a sculpture would be. A couple things we are looking at here, just to kind of make this appealing. We had comments, obviously, about the signage and how that would interact with proposed artwork. I think that's a big deal, and we're looking into that. There are obviously highway requirements that we have little flexibility with, and of course, we're subject to NCDOT guidance in their right-of-way. So we're working through those challenges. But again, I think this is a really great footprint that shows, something that's really, really visible. It's really close to at grade, something that you could really see, and with the right scale could be really impactful to the ride. So this was an area I think that our consultants and Kelly identified. I take no credit for it, and really I think would be a much better location for art as you experience that ride from the Parkway, given the proximity to right there, adjacent to the travelway. So again, another good location here. Again, they have inlaid some of the landscaping elements that are proposed with the landscaping project, and you can really see it's tasteful. And I think with the right, artwork and complementing this area, we have something that we could be proud of. Again, we understand there's some challenges there, given a lot of the signage that are part of DOT requirements, and how we work around those again, some of the details we have to get around still yet. But again, this is what, focal area number 2, the Cherry Marshall interchange. And these 2 areas here seem to be best fit given the parameters that we're working with. And so lastly, we'll move to Peter Street Parkway, and I'll run through this one real briefly. Last time we spent a lot of time talking about on the bridge, and I appreciate the consultant leaving the renderings, what we had kind of discussed last time about, what we had shown for a number of really years was to be something on the bridge. But, we really took a better look at this, and there's a lot of physical restraints. Peter Street Parkway is a really big bridge. There's a lot going on there. In addition, as a part of our project, we are adding the noise wall. You see they have inlaid the noise wall on the east side of the bridge, which is right here, that will be added to the bridge as a part of our project. So after much discussion, listen to you guys and a lot of what's taking place in this area, we are removing the art structures from that bridge and really putting it down on the embankment there as the bridge abutments and everything, that grade, but basically pulling them closer to this Peters Creek off-ramp and getting them off of the bridge. You can kind of see what's shown here. This may be a better photo here, but these areas there that are off of the bridge that are much more visual in the corridor that do, in an effort not to compete so much with everything else that's planned for the Peters Creek Parkway Bridge. So I will call your attention that we are recommending one on the south side of the Parkway. And we can have that discussion. What we're trying to do is maximize our dollars and not just have a bunch of potentials that would eat up our funds, but really pick the best locations and make something that's impactful enough and scaled enough to really get our money's worth on this corridor. So again, now what we'll do is we'll start on, as you travel westbound, right here on the north, excuse me, let's see, I'm flip-flopped here. On the northeast corner, here we have closest to the ballpark where we have the one recommended location here. You see that it is, again, we're going to be working with some of the signing issues there, but again, thinking about scale and height requirements, we work through those issues as well. And of course, coming from Baptist Hospital headed eastbound, there's this area bounded by these retaining walls that is going to be a challenge to do a lot of landscaping efforts, but would be, given its proximity to the corridor, would be a much better visual for some type of art structure. We think that would be a better place to view some type of art structure there. It is basically between the 4th Street Bridge and the Peters Creek Bridge. And if you've ridden through this area, you know this area I'm talking about. It is just kind of just boxed in land. It's grassy right now and would be a good area given that it's sloped and challenges for landscaping, but would provide a good area for some type of art structure. And once again, like I said, these locations were vetted by much more thorough field investigations. We've rid the corridor and we've looked at these areas in much more detail and trying to visualize where you'll be able to view these and understand the relationship between the roadway and the perspective, scale. And again, what I think would have to be worked into an RFP to select good artists to understand that and how you get the relationship between traveling 55 miles an hour and then something big enough to really make a difference. And so those are all elements that we task to the artist and rely on their expertise and really work to make something that would be beneficial for the corridor. And so with that, I felt like I've done a better job, bringing this down to something that's more manageable and that's more direct, and then would scale it to a point where we could provide enough dollars per sculpture where we could get something that would be, beneficial and meaningful at each one of these locations. So with that, I'm going to open it up to Kelly first to see if he has anything he'd like to add. And then I'm happy to take any questions. Our consultants are here. I appreciate their time. And if I can answer it, I've done before, I will gladly defer to the experts. But Kelly, anything that we missed or anything you'd like to supplement?
Thanks, Jeff. The only thing I just want to say is that that these locations are not just limited by the sight lines and everything else, but also and the bond issue, but also State Department of Transportation guidelines, since these will be all in the right of way, and the fact that this money came on board from that creative corridors process that pre-existed the Public Art Commission. So yeah, I just want you all to understand, there are limitations coming from a lot of different directions on this.
Okay. Kelly, let me just expand on that. That's a great point, and you brought it up great. So Kelly's right. We do have to run this by a few other bodies. This will be run through the Creative Corridors Design Review Committee, but it is ultimately subject to NCDOT encroachment agreement, and we have to abide by their basically their guidelines for art in the public right of way. And so those are requirements that, of course, will be passed on to whatever sculpture would be designed. But part of what Ms. Stimmel and our consultants are doing was making sure that we adhere to those. We present options that would be following those guidelines based on basically clear coverage on getting things far enough outside the roadway, making sure things as far as lighting and other treatments don't impact the roadway and cause any issues with safety. All of those things are what we would consider moving forward. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Kelly. And so with that, that's all that I have. And like I said, our consultants are here. We're here to answer questions. What I think we're looking for is an endorsement from this body that would say, okay, we can get behind what you're proposing, and understanding that there's still a lot we have to do. And I'm even open, to bringing these back before you once again, once we nail down artists and we have things that are designed to a point where we can present what would go out there, exactly. But I think today what we're asking for, we need to get moving forward with these locations. We have a lot of design work to do. We have a lot of permitting we have to go through and NCDOT approvals that we have to get. And so that's what we're asking for today. And I'm happy at this point, I'll hush and open it up for discussion.
Jeffrey, I just want to thank you a lot for the work on this, and thank everybody that's from Creative Corridors that's worked on it. And I'm hoping that our committee can give you some feedback and help with this. So I'd like to really hear from members of our committee.
Does that mean you don't want to hear from Greg and me?
Well, we can hear from you, of course. Yes, if you have something to say, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Mildred Rhodes, and I am very impressed with what we see here today. It is a reaction to our comments, and I think it's very well done. I haven't heard the Design Review Committee mentioned since Brian Kubecki resigned maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And is there a Design Review Committee right now? Yes. Yes? Okay, who's chairing that?
Milton, there is a design review committee. We are working to establish the members in that structure. There's been a lot of turnover, unfortunately, with terms that have lapsed. And part of what we're in the middle of now is assigning those seats, and there'll be a lot more information that's forthcoming. But yeah, we're in the turnover process right now. But there is still that design review committee, and it will still go before that body.
I believe you should have a couple of Creative Corridors board members on that one also, like you have done today with Greg and me. So that's one thing. I think all that flows together in the concept phase right now. And the second thing I wanted to mention was the Peter Oliver pieces that are going to go on Strowway and down to the Muse and to the railroad building are not funded yet. And so every bit of that that is being proposed by Walter Hood is in need of a startup dollar from the city badly to make the thing go. It could be 10 million, it could be 20 million. I have no idea about what Walter Hood is going to recommend. But in that platform, Greg, Jeff, in that platform that's at the top of the Strowway on south side is a great place for a major piece of public art, a 30-foot, 40 feet place. And I'd like you to check that out, please, at some point. So I think one time we talked about 7 pieces. We're now down to 5. Is that correct, Jeff?
That's correct, Milton.
Okay, so there's room for 2 more in the ordinance. Is that the way you read the language?
So let me be brief, and I think this warrants a discussion probably outside of this meeting, Greg and Milton, to get into some of these details. But there is no set number of structures we have to provide. What the city and our consultants are trying to do is be able to provide enough funds per structure where we can build something that is going to be of scale that can be actually visible enough from, we don't want a bunch of little bitty structures out there that doesn't really do anything. So what we're trying to do is narrow the scope, and then, less is more. In other words, we're trying to make sure we can provide enough funds per location where we can build something that's meaningful. That's all it is. But I think to your point about the Oliver site, it probably warrants some discussion outside of this body. I know that I've seen some emails back and forth, and I'll follow up with you guys to see where we stand on all that, and Kelly as well, as we work together. That's another initiative, and I understand that they all can work together, and I think my job is to coordinate all that, but maybe not so much for the purpose of this discussion today.
Well, I just want to mention that Creative Quarters has been working with Mrs. Paul. If you notice the review of Chris Paul's new contract today, $400 million he has earned since he started his career in professional basketball. So I would say that the potential there is substantial, and we should protect that with a gift or a plan or in the next month, we're going to get what Walter Hood has proposed. So let's protect some of this area for the Strawway South Side. Let's see.
Understood. Thank you, Milton.
So you want committee feedback to the plans, Jeffrey. I want to ask you some questions about it.
Okay.
Essentially what you're talking about is the concerns we had about visibility for vehicular traffic moving pretty quickly allowed you guys to transition to a conceptual site for a larger art demonstration. And so those would be the places with the solid circles, right?
That's what we're proposing. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that makes sense to me. You got my support. And then you'll come back with something more specific on those locations, which have the visibility is better because of the grade of the earth, that kind of thing.
That's right. And its proximity to the corridor itself. Yes.
Hey, David, can you give some words to size that you tell the artist to work with? Is that in the game of selection? What are those words you put in the RFP?
Milton, you're asking me really about the RFP that we're going to be we would write for these, and how we can help define what goes into these locations in terms of scale. Well, clearly any artist that takes on any one of these locations will come to grips with the movement of the traffic and the scale that's demanded by the site, I think, to be successful. That's what I would say. And so there are various ways that can be tackled. I think that the larger question is, what kinds of guidance we can give artists in terms of the content, in terms of the direction that they move for in the work? That's the question, I guess, that I have. And I'd like to hear from some of the other members of the committee about that. But I hope that answered your question, Milton. I think, you know, scale and is really, really important here. And it often, when it's such a dominant issue, it will definitely be on the minds of the people that are designing for it.
Go by the Four Corners in Salisbury sometime and look at those little pieces they did. And they're just not impactful and not seen now, 3 years later.
No, I think, I mean, I will just go out on a limb here and I say the potential for disaster is quite large with this. And you can ask me a little bit further on what I mean by that, but I'll defer to some other members of the committee.
Betsy has her hand raised. I have a question too, Betsy. You can go ahead.
Thanks, India. And thank you, Jeffrey. I echo the support for the clarifications and responsiveness about visibility and presence. And in response to what David's saying, I was definitely thinking about Milton's point and the location of the Peter Oliver cultural site, and that the question of what messaging, what content, what language we want to speak in here feels really important as well. And I appreciate you raising that, David. Of course, we often quote the City of Arts and Innovation, but I believe that at this moment in our city, it's important to use those tools, arts and innovation, to make statements around the challenges that our community faces and possibilities in growth in our community. So I'm thinking about the Creative Corridors bridges that worked to subtly suggest reconnection across places that had been divided and, you know, by highways and bulldozers. And I'm just thinking that with the Liberty Street right between the Cherry and Marshall locations being that site for the Peter Oliver Cultural Heritage Site, and the growing conversation around Liberty Street being I don't think the language is in any way correct yet, but being a kind of freedom corridor or liberty corridor with an African-American Heritage Center right now planned for downtown on Liberty Street. And I think it's too early to talk very seriously about what that might be or how we might, you know, how that might grow or whether it's desired. But I wonder if there are ways to think through the possibility of celebrating a aspirational freedom, or I don't really have any coherent thoughts about it right now. I just think that that particular part of the city is really concentrated on raising past histories to visibility and thinking about the potential of greater equity and justice in the city. And so I wonder if arts and innovation might be in some way used as a tool to serve those goals.
My question is, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
I had a question in regards to, so Jeff, you said that you limited the number of sculptures in order to provide more funding for the 5 that you all have selected in terms of location. Can you tell me the estimated cost that you're thinking for each sculpture based on these locations?
I can figure out where my mute button was. Yes, we're looking at, that would put us, so, you know, part of what we're doing is designing foundations, and there's some electrical work component, you know, because we do anticipate that these will be lighted structures. And so all that being said, we're looking at about all in 250 to 280. You know, if we're talking 5 structures in our available budget, which is about 1.4 million, just depending on some of the design parameters and restraints that we could run into, but that's a ballpark.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. First, I really appreciate how you incorporated our feedback from last time. And it just strikes me, so now 4 of the 5 sculptures we're taking off the bridge, and now they're going to be in, grassy areas. And I'm just wondering, my concern is, this goes back to the conversation of scale. Is there going to be this temptation for people on foot, right, to want to experience these sculptures closer? And these areas just give me a little pause because they're like on ramps. And I'm just thinking, like, is there going to be this temptation to want to get up close to these sculptures? And I think the location like that could be potential. I just think that has to be really thought through.
Yeah, so just to echo a little bit, I have a couple concerns. Can you slide it over, Jeff, a little bit? Like slide your cursor over to the ones. Okay, yeah, the ones that are like right there where your mouse is on those kind of slopey hills. It feels a little haphazard, like just random. And I understand that you want it close to the corridor, but I do want us to be intentional in terms of the locations of each one to make sure it makes sense where they are. And they're also echoing the landscape, these like, are we going to do landscaping as well to make sure that it makes sense being on those sloping hills, because I think there's a point, Jennifer has a point, people may want to see them closer, right? And so having them in these locations, we have to think about that as well in terms of foot traffic.
Let me jump in and add on to, or think a little bit also with India on this, particularly the one near the ballpark, which is actually quite a large area. I see that in the rendering, it's been filled in with foliage. Is that correct? Is that part of the plan for landscaping?
So I'm gonna make a comment, and Kimberly, you correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that has been filled in as a rendering, yes, but it is basically what is proposed with the landscaping initiative that will be both NCDOT and the city supplementing that with our project. Kimberly, did I say that correctly?
Yes, Jeff, and right now that shows more what NCDOT has proposed. We can modify that, and we can also enhance, once we know the art, whether we need to grade a plateau or bring the landscaping around so that the visibility is optimum. All of those are items that can be adjusted once we move forward.
So I'm going to suggest that just following up with that, that's really good. Thank you, Kimberly. You might want to choose the center of that position and make something that has really a massive scale. Put more money into that piece so that it's a very tall piece that it can stand next to the stadium. It would be a really big signature piece. Instead of doing the same thing 7 different times or 5 different times, you may want to put some emphasis on one, maybe. These are decisions that I think that's the kind of thing that is sort of the next step, given the locations that you've scouted. I think you have to be really, really critical about these locations, because when I mentioned the possibility for it going wrong, that is the kind of thing where you see, inadequate scale or in a place where nobody sees it. It kind of becomes kind of a joke. And we on the Public Art Commission, we don't want to have that.
Amen.
We don't want to have crummy thinking on this. And thinking that came as a result of a plan that was made years and years ago and was never really figured out. So we need to really help you think through this, I think. And
define mass.
So I'll stop there because I want to hear from Cliff, who had a lot of ideas, and other people.
No, I'm just sitting back here and letting everyone speak for me, because I think a lot of the things that came up were things that I was also thinking about. I think overall, I think this is an improvement. And I think there's some other adjustments that need to be made, but I think the point about the monumentality of the piece next to the ballpark, plus accessibility to pedestrians, whether we need to proceed with that or not, I think are very good points.
So David, this is Jeff. If I may make a couple comments.
Sure.
Great. I think one of the things that the city, of course, we're tasked to do is the whole name of our project is enhancing the corridor. And we're not here to say it has to go here. You know, I think part of what our project will do will be enhance what NCDOT does with their landscaping and then modify it and further enhance it to meet the desires of the corridor. And as you heard Kimberly say, there's things we can do with it with landscaping to supplement and really make this do what we want it to do. And I think the devil's in those details. Certainly, as you mentioned, David, we've got to be critical as we get down, go down this path that what we do. I'm not a landscape architect, but we've got good ones on staff here that are working on this project. And I think that's their scope is to incorporate their design to account for what we're hearing of these concerns. And we really comprehensively consider those things. Regarding the pedestrian access and the desire to touch and feel these things, I think is a real concern. And so 2 comments on that. We're proposing areas that largely are bounded by controlled access fencing. And there's a lot of fencing that will be around these areas that are designed to keep, the corridor, free of things of that nature. But again, we will consider that as we move forward. I think that's a great comment. And certainly NCDOT guidelines has some of those same parameters when we get into that design level of detail. So we'll definitely consider that. But again, we're looking at areas that are largely bound by fencing, or we'll subject these to further scrutiny regarding the pedestrian access. So I think that's a great comment, and we'll consider that. Very well done.
I just want to jump in and just ask if what I'm hearing is shifting funds. I understand, that these don't all have to have the same exact amount of funds, like the Church Street sculpture, if you decide to go that way, could certainly be a smaller scale than the Peters Creek Parkway one that we're looking at now. And, funds could shift. It could be like 500,000 for the Peters Creek and 200,000 for the Church Street or something like that. But I mean, are you all comfortable with 5 sculptures, or, are you talking about doing fewer? Is that a possibility? Possibly losing one of the Peters Creek ones just so that you have the monumentality that you desire for one in that very large interchange.
I would go for quality over quantity. Maybe taking into account, what is it, the Cherry Street and Marshall Street sculptures, looking at maybe editing those and putting those funds more towards the Peters Creek location.
I have a question about whether we could maybe contain some of this in the RFP. Like, could we potentially say that we're seeking artists to describe 3 to 5 sculptures or artworks for our city, and that they will be between 100,000 and $1 million. Obviously these numbers are just tests, but that we might have a RFP that is open enough, for RFQ, that we could make some of those decisions based on the artists who apply, knowing that we do want to seek artworks of larger scales at some locations than others.
I mean, and to your point, Betsy, I was thinking as well, like, I like the number of sculptures. I don't want to lessen the number. I think 5 is a really good number. I do think that all of them aren't going to lend themselves to a $280,000 budget, right? Like, some may be a little less. So for instance, when they did the airport renovation in Charlotte, they had a couple sculptures that were $1 million. Those are the ones that were going in the airport, that were going to be in particular destinations where it's going to high visibility, high traffic, and they allotted $1 million for those sculptures. Then they had some sculptures that were $500,000, some were $200,000, based on the location, based on the visibility, and based on the size needed in order to create a visible impact for that particular location. So I think that, you know, with the money allotted, we can just say, okay, maybe the one on Church Street on the bridge doesn't necessarily need, you know, $200,000 to make an impact. Maybe that's a $100,000 sculpture, and the other 100,000 could go towards the one near the ballpark to make it bigger, right? Like, I think we have enough money to move around and a limited number of sculptures that each one can be, you know, successfully executed, but doesn't necessarily have to be removed in order to make one more monumental than the other, if that makes any sense.
And I'll just offer a follow-up to India's comment, which I think you're spot on. In keeping with the guidelines published by Creative Corridors adopted by City Council, is we've highlighted multiple locations on the corridor. So that's just why this was proposed. It's because we're in keeping with what has been previously approved. So it's a combination of juggling the available funds per sculpture, but also identifying enough locations that will be consistent with what we've approved previously. So that's why we've landed to multiple locations, just for clarity.
One of the things that I think is, all of that sounds great, and I agree with everybody, but I think one of the things that I just want to make sure I was clear on is that I think we view that the bridge is hard to make that, particularly on Peters Creek Parkway, a monumental size scale presentation, and that the grassy area on the exterior is superior to make the attempt. I mean, is there a fundamental agreement on that?
Milton again, but if I had to give up one, it would be that grassy area next to the ballpark. I'm thinking of coming into town and going out of town. What is the priority? And I'd say coming into town, we want them to see a city of arts and innovation. And I'm afraid that last one, ballpark, is the one on the northeast side. It's kind of, I've already seen the bridge, the Green Street Bridge. I've seen the wonderful looking ballpark. I don't know that you need one going out of town.
You know, I don't understand what you're talking about, Milton, but you're saying that it was on the leaving the city. I see what you're saying, that it would be on the other side of the bridge you're talking about. It would be on the western side of Peters Creek Parkway intersection, the northwest section is what you're saying, or?
No, I'm saying northeast side of Parkway. If I had to give up one, I think that's the one I'd give up.
The one, yeah, you would give up the one on the northeast section in favor of one
on the Strollway.
On the Strollway.
Yeah. But I'm not on the committee.
Hard to tell today.
I'm sorry, Jason. I'm sorry I didn't get to speak to you yesterday.
I think a question that I have is, you know, if we can approve that a set of locations. I have a concern that the people who will be making decisions about how to frame these pieces understand how that is done and how that is best done. And my concern is with the process. Number one, I'd like to know a little bit about how much the Public Art Committee can influence what goes into the locations if we approve of them. I understand the constraints of the DOT, but if we can learn and understand the constraints of the city, of the bond issue exactly, then I'm hoping that we'd be able to influence, for instance, the scale and the amount of money that would go into each one of them. You know, I think Betsy's idea is worth considering, the idea of having an RFP for the group that may or may not, and let artists into it, but that may conflict maybe sometimes with the DOT, with what the DOT might see or might want. So the other thing, there's a lot here. The other thing is that I worry about is the speed with which the urgency with which this seems to need to be done. And that can be a big problem when you're trying to do things right. I just say that I would like to move it along. I think that's a great. I mean, we need to do that, but I also want to make sure that everybody understands that this process is not easy if we're going to get good work. It takes time.
Well, I think
go ahead, Jason.
Okay, I'll be brief. I think from my standpoint, I think the thing that impressed me was I simply don't think the scale of, I agree with I think I agree with you, David, in regard to scale, that either big or go home, particularly in when you're in close proximity to large buildings and facilities like the baseball stadium. But I do believe in, maybe you can have smaller ones, but I do agree with some should be disproportionate. So I believe that they shouldn't all be the same. And I believe particularly the ones that are going to be large, I don't think the bridge is big enough to really support the scale that's needed. So that's really kind of where I'm at now. And that's my general sense of things. As far as where they go and what they are, I'm not really all that, I don't think we get too much further than that anyway today.
I just like to add, I echo both what Jason and David are saying, and just like to add that I also am a little bit concerned about the speed, because I think if we get down the line of saying we're going to put monumental sculptures in A, B, and C location and smaller sculptures in D and E location, we really limit the potential for the artists to come up with a vision that might have hugely transformative impact. We already have these gorgeous bridges that are united and that really change the way people experience moving through the city. Some artists might come up with something that is on the bridge and that has impact and that retains the beauty of the bridge itself that we have not conceived so far. And I just think the maximum flexibility within responsiveness to the sites and the existing conditions that we can include in the call to artists might land us something has not entered this room in terms of its amazing potential for impact on our city. So just a hope for ongoing, like the power of the artist to have an input and impact seems really important at this juncture.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing is that you're just not sure that the. Let me back up. What we're showing you are locations that are constrained by the State Department of Transportation's rules, the original bond funding, and then the Creative Corridors guidelines. And there's concern that we're going to nail down these sites, and then the artists are going to be too limited. But one of the things that Betsy suggested was we could include something like this document in the RFP and say, here, no matter how much discussion this group has, the possible locations aren't really going to change that much based on the DOT Creative Corridors bond constraints. So if you're worried about flexibility, we could certainly have a document like this that says, here are the possible locations. And instead of, sending out 5 different RFPs where, artist A is going to apply for Church Street and artist B is going to apply for Peters Creek Parkway, you might do it in a way that says, there are 7 possible locations. We'd like to have something that spans the corridor and have a team of artists propose to us what they would do with, $1.4 million to go from, to go use these locations for a comprehensive, art plan for for this corridor. Is that something you'd be comfortable with, that could, use locations that could be approved by DOT? Because the urgency and the timeline here is not that we want to decide exactly where the art is going to be. It's that so many other groups need to kind of get their hands into this and approve it. And, if we're holding up that process so that nobody else can kind of get their input, it's going to be too long a time span before we can even engage the artists. That's my main worry on this. So what I'm asking is, if we can approve these locations in concept soon enough, can we include them in an RFP so that the artist could respond in a more flexible way?
See, I'm personally, this is just me playing devil's advocate a little bit. I'm concerned about all of this flexibility that we're providing the artists. And I think that this is me just working with different cities, people who are not within the arts want some structure, in terms of what's going to happen with the artists, how much money is going to be given, how big the structure is going to be. So the question I have, like, for instance, the piece on Church Street on the bridge, right? Is there an architect that can say, listen, this sculpture can only be this big, it can only weigh this much if you put it at this particular location. If you put it at the ballpark, if you're going to create something monumental, it can only be this big, it can only weigh this much, and this is what we're going to approve. And so then we can say, okay, this is how much money we can allot to this. This is how much money we can allot to this based on the guidelines that are provided to us by DOT on how big this particular sculpture can be. Then it will allow us.
DOT will come in.
Oh, go ahead.
So that's where DOT will come in. If we can say we would like to pursue sculptures at these locations, then it goes to DOT. They have their guidelines, and the architect who designed the Church Street Bridge, et cetera, can say, you're limited to this height and weight on the Church Street Bridge if you want a sculpture there. And then we need to hear these locations first so that they can also weigh in.
Yeah. I guess I was just wondering in terms of and this could be further down the line in terms of opening the RFP and saying we're gonna tell the artists they have between $100,000 and $1 million to make something. I think it may be more beneficial for the artist to have a set budget and say, okay, this is how much money I have to do this particular thing at this particular location. This is how much money I have for this particular location as well. So they have a better understanding on how to move forward accordingly, because $100,000 to $1 million is a lot of money to think about in terms of what you can do and how much time the artist is going to put in terms of how they can make that particular work, if that makes sense. I approve all the locations. Like, I think they all look great. I mean, if that's what we're trying to do today, I think the layout is great. In terms of the concerns that we've discussed. But I do think that leaving it so open for artists actually sometimes makes it more confusing in terms of what you can do. And I think maybe having tighter guidelines makes it a little easier to execute a proposal and make it make sense.
Well, if we can approve locations, we can work that out in the RFP process. We don't need to know today that a sculpture on the northeast corner of Peters Creek Parkway needs to be 50 feet tall or 100 feet tall, but we know it's going to be big. But again, we can work that out in that RFP conversation. After DOT and the design review committee also have some input. So we'll kind of know what our, we'll kind of know what our restrictions are.
I think that's good, Kelly. I think, that makes sense. I just want to make sure that we that in the process we have some flexibility with the sites, and that, for example, if it's possible to move the northeast side of the Peters Creek Parkway into the middle, and if it's not designated to be that exactly where it is, that's the kind of thing I think that we probably will need. I would say, in my opinion, and I drive through there a lot, so I think I know, but I could be wrong, but the one on the southwest corner of Peters Creek Parkway, I find to be still problematic, and maybe somebody who's actually looked at that going by there, it looks like a lost place to me. And it always looked like a lost little corner that maybe somebody will see for a couple seconds, but it's really wedged into a strange little site. Don't know, just, it looks like it's being done to have something that you can look at going into town on that side. But let's face it, we've got an issue here with one going west. There are much better visual locations, I think, than going east, unfortunately.
You know, you're right about that, David. And the only way you could really think about that space is if you were to consider it to be one of the spaces that you were to save quite a bit of funding with and make it a minor, piece. It's the only way I think you could utilize it, even if you felt it was a waste of time and money, even for a smaller piece. And what drove the decision for these locations, and what were the other locations that might be considered if but for these? And, not to get into a long drawn out conversation about it, but, I think we owe Kelly and the city, at least to get as close as we can to approving the locations. I'd love to try to do that and be effective for the city today. That's my goal. Hopefully that's our goal, but if we can't, we can't. But that would be ideal, I think. Even if we have to look at, if we can agree, if there's 5 locations, for instance, if we can agree on 4 of them and have a dispute about the 5th, that might be best, if you see where I'm going.
Yeah. I definitely can approve the 5. I can approve the 5. I could see that this one could be something really unusual, but possibly, like going back to what Betsy says about us giving the artists some leeway and credit. Maybe it's almost like a secret piece that goes there. It might end up being that way. So I'm leaning towards giving this the approval of these 5 sites.
Can I make a comment? This is Greg Garrett. Is it okay to make a comment, David?
Sure.
Okay. Regarding that southwest corner that we've been discussing there, I agree that the motorist will only have a split second to be able to look at it and grasp what it might be. Because if they're making a curve there, for one thing, they're driving in a curve pattern, or they're getting ready to get off at Peters Creek. So they're probably, at best, they're going to look at it in a split second and not probably really appreciate it. What I'm wondering is whether some of the artists could consider, if you look on that same image, you have a blank wall there, a retaining wall. I don't know whether NCDOT would allow for murals or for tile to be put on there, or something else that extends back that both the westbound and eastbound traffic could probably see. It looks like it's a larger palette there that a mural could be put there and probably be as interesting and as impactful as anything. The other thing I wanted to say was you have the multi-use path that will stretch from end to end. And I think you have an opportunity to, again, do some things that will be pleasant and appealing to the people that walk or ride or jog along that corridor that be sort of oriented toward them, really the pedestrian instead of the motorist. So I don't know that all, in my opinion, I don't know that all of the art pieces have to be something you have to see from the road. It could be within the corridor. But I think there's a couple other locations that could be taken advantage of, like the Broad Street interchange location, which is now just a grassy field. Who knows? That might be something that's across the ball from the ballpark, and if they develop a park there, that might be a nice place for some sort of art sculpture or something different than just a large piece of art. So I guess I think there's a couple other things maybe to consider for an artist that's maybe not so much structure oriented, but I just wanted to toss that out. Those are some things I've been sort of pondering as we go over these sites.
David, like you, Creative Quarters is meeting tomorrow morning, and we will be reviewing this plan. I hope, Jeff, we can get something like this. Oh, and you get the two opinions and work through it. I think the rush this day to decide that is, I don't know. Why do you have to have it today? Why do you have to have it today?
I mean, just briefly, I think what we're trying to do is give our consultant some guidance so they can move forward. You know, part of this is actual engineering and structural design, that you're bringing in structural engineers to design, you know, the foundations, to design the lighting components of them, and there's a lot more that's involved. And we've got to get to the point, as also mentioned, there's other bodies that have to approve this, and just trying to stay on track for our project, and understanding the time it's going to take for other bodies to approve, and then the actual design components. Just for example, Church Street, you know, there's obviously a structural component of putting a structure on a bridge, and that's part of the contract with Stimulus to verify that whatever we get from an artist would work there structurally. And so there's just a lot of other hurdles we have to jump through. And this is an effort to give our consultants guidance so that we can continue on with our design effort.
Well, let me weigh in on that, Jeff. Church Street is the easy one. It's constrained by the bridge. It's got a pedestal. The other ones are the hard ones. If you come to us and say, well, we got to know this because we got to put down a foundation because that's in our time frame and our consultant wants to do that. We want to do that soon. We put down a foundation and then we do the RFP and ask the artist to fit their art onto that foundation. That is what I think we would try. I think most of us on the committee would probably try to avoid. You don't want to have the artist constrained by a concrete pad wherever it was, the easiest to put that in. Very concerned about that way. I mean, I think this is how public art was done 20 or 30 years ago, but it shouldn't be the way we're doing it here. Very concerned.
Let me be clear, David. I don't think that's the intent. And so if I stated it that way, I apologize. We have this consultant on staff through the life of this project. And we're going to make sure that what we do fits the area it goes in. We're not going to design a foundation and then have an artist conform to that design. That's not the intent. I don't think Kelly's going to write the RFP that way. We're going to make sure that it's done exactly the opposite the way apparently it was stated. So I think what we're doing satisfies your concern.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jeff.
The intent of today is that these are the locations that we feel we can move forward that are most closely going to get us in the ballpark with NCDOT approval, that are going to be the most visual from the Parkway and get us enough structures that we can build something of scale and maximize our dollars. We have a lot of work still to do with design scale, actual, fit and finish but that's the artist's work. We're not there yet. And that's not the intent of today's meeting.
Well, does anybody else on the committee? Because I think we should try to wrap this up. We've had a lot of discussion. I've heard people say they're ready to approve of the locations. Do we have any last comments? We could decide then to take a vote.
Is there still concern about the southwest corner on Peters Creek? Is that something that you all want to pursue? Do you want to swap it for the alternative, the open circle in the, on the other side of the bridge?
Let me ask if we could swap that one for something that had some kind of pedestrian interaction. Is that,
well, that one has, of all of them, it has the most pedestrian interaction because it's where the multi-use path comes in and intersects with Peters Creek Parkway. So that would be the reason to keep that one.
Okay. What are the sight lines like from the multi-use pathway? What would they be? Is it looking down at it?
Maybe say that again, or maybe it would answer your question.
I mean, is the multi-use pathway would be close to the same level as that location? I'm not sure that I understand really, given the construction of the retaining wall, et cetera, there, what that location would look like. I mean, I think we could, certainly have there been other locations on the multi-use path that were identified? Let me ask it that way too. Any others that were ever considered?
We looked at the one where it enters from Marshall Street, and it's something we discussed last time. But it would need to be smaller scale just based on where the power lines come in there, and also that it wouldn't, it would only really be viewable from that location.
From the pathway.
Right. And I guess the Marshall Street Bridge.
So do you feel that, Kelly, do you feel that the Peters Creek Parkway is the best possible site for it? One of the possible sites?
I think if it were pedestrian scaled, that would be a good use for it. But I do, it is a quick view from the highway, and it's probably my least favorite location of these.
Well, I really loved Greg's idea in terms of maybe all of them aren't sculptures. Like maybe some of them may be tile or mosaic or something else that's more visually stunning on all of that concrete that's going down the side of the highway. And because it's such a small little corner, maybe it's not a sculpture, maybe it's something else, which could be kind of interesting visually. And having a little mix up of not just big sculptures, but like maybe there is a mosaic or some tile going down some of those concrete slabs that you see when you're going down 40.
This is Jeff. Let me make one comment on that. I think that's a great option. And so one thing what I think we can do for the group, that's going to be subject to direct approval from NCDOT. The city, I don't want to take a lot of time and effort going down this if it's just going to be a hard no. So what I can offer is that we reach out to those folks at NCDOT and ask the question, is that something that's even feasible and they would allow? I don't want this body to go down this path if that's something that's possible, because frankly, I don't know that it would be. Let me ask that question before we commit to that. Is maybe a potential ad alternate.
I'm going to move that we adopt the 4 sites, excluding the one that is, I think, maybe the least favorable, and maybe, I don't know, and say that is one of a number of alternative sites for a 5th. It's a supplemental location, potentially. I'd be happier with that than voting for all 5 and making it set in stone. I think the other ones are acceptable to me. Again, saying with flexibility built in.
If you could clarify that just a bit, I think I'd be willing to second it.
So it would be 4 Church Street, Cherry, Marshall, Northeast Peters Creek as the recommended locations, with the west side of Church Street, and then the southeast and southwest of Peters Parkway as possible supplementals.
Any discussion about which one would be like anything about scale at all on each location rather than sculpture versus non-sculpture?
I think we could work that out in RFPs, along with the constraints that are put on those sites by DOT.
And then how would we propose a solution to the 5th one?
I'm not sure how we do that. We don't have to have 5. I think we need to find another good site. I mean, it may be the site that is already chosen there, and it be a more pedestrian oriented sculpture, or maybe the other pedestrian site that Kelly had marked on the map. Would that be sufficient for today's decision?
I'll second it so we can have discussion.
Any discussion?
I agree, David. I mean, as long as we don't lose it, right? Like, as long as we get a chance to, as long as we can put that 5th one somewhere else, or, like, I totally agree with you. I just don't want them to think we just want 4 and not a 5th one. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. The 5th to be determined.
Yeah.
I can agree with that too. And if Jeffrey's able to find out what other medium is possible, if it's a mural, if it's tile, if other things are possible, that would be helpful as well.
Yeah, same here. I'd be interested to see if that 5th site, we could work on the retaining wall.
Jeffrey, does that help you enough? Is that Jeffrey and Kelly?
Yeah, I have one, sorry to keep confusing things. I have one outstanding question. So as a pedestrian scale, we're looking at the southwest of Peters Creek. Are you also interested in the Marshall Street entrance of the multi-use path or not?
I would be, but I don't know it. I mean, I don't have a basis to make that decision, honestly.
That's just as a pedestrian scale option.
Yeah.
Is that one still a possibility, Jeff?
I think it's a possibility, yes, Kelly. Why don't we move forward with this approach where we would, keep these 4, and then we have a 5th one being incorporated with MEP in this area as the 5th one, and then should funding allow, as I don't want to commit to it, and we do all this effort, and then we don't have the money to even do it. So is a potential add alternate maybe for this location there at Marshall Street. That would be my recommendation.
Okay. So let's vote, if we can, on 4 locations for major pieces that what we've determined, and then 2 pedestrian alternatives. Those to be determined based on funding.
Yeah, I want to speak. I'm not on the committee, so I shouldn't.
Milton, we need to move along here. So
yeah, well, I'm gonna move along to Strollway. Ought to be the same as the one on the southwest side of Cedar Creek.
okay. Kelly, is that permissible? Great. Jeffrey, is that permissible to add that site to the Strollway possibilities?
That would not be in keeping with the Creative Corridors guidelines. It does not apply to one of the bridges, no. The Strollway Bridge is the focal bridge, and we've done that with a major bridge project. I think the intent here is to separate the Peter Oliver initiative with the Business 40 enhancements. The Business 40 enhancement was a bond approved, citizen approved initiative, and that's what we're doing today. So I would say in that regard, no.
I'm sorry, Milton.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you very much. I've lost before. But we got a long way to go.
We do. We have a long way to go.
You got to go to Creative Corridors board tomorrow.
Are we ready? Can we make this happen, group? Maybe we could switch to a full, we could take down our,
Yeah.
does everybody know what we're voting on?
Yes.
Okay. Elizabeth, I haven't got all about you. I haven't heard from you. You usually say something. Elizabeth, you're on mute. Demute.
I said, I agree with what everyone has said, and I'm especially amenable to David's comments on that, the little lost location. So but I'm happy to vote on those four things with possible options on the 5th location.
Okay. Okay. Great. And so everybody's been, Owens, I guess, dropped off, but okay. If we're ready to vote, Kelly, you want to do the roll call then? Everybody understands what we're voting for, right? Okay.
And Kelly's on mute, says the person who was on mute.
So this is Church Street, Cherry Street, Marshall Street, and then northeast Peters Creek Parkway with the 2 pedestrian alternatives based on funding. And that's southwest of Peters Creek and then Marshall Street where it intersects with the multi-use path. David made the motion. Did anybody second it? Was that Jason?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And then, so we have India.
Should I just say I agree? Yes.
Yes.
All right.
We're not.
All right.
Cliff.
Yes.
David made the motion. Betsy, is Betsy still here? Betsy left.
You agreed though.
She did agree.
Yeah. She did.
Elizabeth.
I agree.
Owens had to leave. Jennifer.
Yes, I agree. I'm in support of this plan.
And Jason.
Owens did type in text that he agrees with the sites today, if that helps. I don't know if that's necessarily the ability, but you can look at the chat yourself.
And then we do still have a quorum anyway. Even with 2 people leaving.
Good.
Okay. All
Kelly,
right.
I'm going to have I'm going to have to sign off in just 3 minutes. I've got another meeting happening, so I apologize, but I'm glad that we made it through to this.
All right, thank you, David. I can jump into project reports if you'd like. I can do that all very quickly. So Memory Wall was unveiled yesterday. Several of you were in attendance, thank you. Was definitely an excellent ceremony, and India's remarks were very well received. Benton Convention Center update, issued the RFP, and we've had some interest in that already. Artistic bus shelters will be meeting again this month and hope to bring a proposal to you in September, possibly October. I'd like to just avoid too much overlap with the RFP for the Benton, because I think that'll be a lot of the same artist pools. And then downtown sculpture, we're close to finalizing that design. Just have a couple little tweaks before sending it off to Mona for fabrication. And then COVID Memorial, we're planning, I think I updated you, had the same update last month, but we're planning to apply for ARPA funds through the county for this, and that's American Recovery Something Act. Sorry. And that's the end of project reports. David's still here.
Excellent. It's not 2:30 yet. I mean, yeah, 3:30.
All right.
Sure.
You want to do, we have public comment period. Craig and Milton are here to represent Creative Corridors. I don't know if you also planned on doing a public comment period. Yeah.
Have Jeff present this to Creative Corridors Executive Committee tomorrow morning at 8:30.
Jeff, I don't know if you can make it. I was planning on attending that meeting, so maybe I can let you off the hook, but email me if you already have plans for 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Kelly, you and I can discuss. We'll see who's best available for tomorrow at 8:30.
Okay. Do you want to just hang back on this meeting and we
Sure.
Can, okay. All right.
Now can we adjourn?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, motion to adjourn.
Second.
Jason, you ready to go?
Yeah. Hour and a half.
Hit the wall.
Yeah. But I'm happy we got to where we did today.
Yes.
Okay, 3:30. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.